Well, hello and welcome everyone to Clearwater's August Cyber Briefing. I'm Monica Pastor, Events Marketing Manager here at Clearwater, and I'll be your host for today. These monthly cyber briefings are part of Clearwater's ongoing effort to help healthcare leaders stay informed and prepared in an increasingly complex digital landscape. We're thrilled to have you here with us today, and we hope you gain a lot of insight from today's session. Before we dive in, I would like to quickly cover a few housekeeping items. All attendees are in listen-only mode and will remain on mute and off camera. Please submit your questions in the Q&A box. Your questions will be addressed live during that segment or followed up with after the close of this briefing. We've got some great resources to share with you today that are relevant to today's session. Navigate to the Resources tab on your Zoom navigation bar where you can find those links, as well as review biographies on our speakers from today. We will be sending out a follow-up email within 24 hours that contains a replay from today's session, an attendance certificate, and the slide deck. And lastly, when the webinar ends or when you leave, a brief survey will prompt up. Please take a moment to give us your feedback on what you found of value today and what you would like to see covered in future briefings. All right, what's on deck for today's briefing? As we all know, healthcare is undergoing a massive digital transformation driven by emerging technologies like AI, cloud computing, and interoperability initiatives, alongside new tools to enhance patient engagement. But with this rapid innovation comes increased cybersecurity exposure. Today's session takes a forward-looking lens on these developments. We're thrilled to welcome Steve Cagle, CEO of Clearwater, who will first provide an update on the latest cybersecurity and regulatory developments impacting healthcare organizations over the past 30 days. From HHS and OCR activity to the latest enforcement actions and policy shifts, Steve will share timely insights on the newest threat actors and what you need to know now and what may be coming next. Following that, Steve will sit down with Erik Pupo, Director at Guidehouse, for a fireside chat exploring key findings from Guidehouse's recent research on healthcare technology trends and their cybersecurity implications for provider organizations. So welcome, Steve and Erik. Thank you both for being here today. And with that, let's get started. Steve, I'll turn it over to you for this month's cyber update.
Thank you, Monica, and welcome everybody to the August cyber briefing. Want to start with our usual update on the next slide of reported healthcare breaches to the OCR breach portal. And as always, it's a reminder that these figures include all reported breaches of 500 or more individual records. Through July 30th, there were a total of 341 breaches, 418 breaches with 29 million records, 36 million records reported to OCR's breach portal. Of course, this is a pretty big month in terms of a number of breaches compared to June. Last month, we talked about fewer number of breaches in terms of actual individuals affected, but a large volume of how many breaches occurred. So as we continue to look at the data, we always want to point out some of the breaches that stand out here and provide some more feedback and information. But again, heading to now more than halfway through the year, 36 million individuals affected. So some notable breaches. Anne Arundel Dermatology was breached. And they provide general surgical and cosmetic services at over 60 locations. This was really a mega breach of 1.9 million records that came from a ransomware attack. And what was interesting here is that this organization actually suffered two breaches. The first was on February 14th and then again on May 13th. So we don't know yet who the threat actors were behind this one, but some suspect that this actually may have been a sustained intrusion due to the timing of attacks. If not, they were targeted by two separate threat actors. Another large breach was Radiology Associates of Richmond, and we've discussed quite a bit on the cyber briefings that radiology and imaging centers are typically targeted due to the large amount of very sensitive data that they have. And this one indeed had quite a bit of data, 1.4 million records involved in that. And then lastly, wanted to point out even CMS has reported a major breach last month. And what happened here on May 2nd, CMS actually began getting calls to its call center with inquiries from beneficiaries that said they received letters from CMS confirming the creation of Medicare.gov accounts that they did not initiate. And CMS then investigated this and discovered that threat actors had fraudulently created new accounts between 2023 and 2025 using valid beneficiary information, including their Medicare beneficiary identifier. And this involved 103,000 beneficiaries, which is a huge number. It was going on for quite a bit of time. And CMS stated that, quote, the suspicious accounts have since been deactivated and the agency has disabled the ability to make new accounts from foreign IP addresses. So implies that these are foreign threat actors that were not detected, coming from foreign IP addresses. Again, just highlighting even our government can have these kinds of things happening undetected. Go to the next slide, please. So wanted to cover the annual 2025. This is the 20th anniversary of IBM sponsoring Ponemon to complete the cost of a data breach report. And there are a few key points I'll go over. The headline here really is that while globally the cost of a breach has declined, and that's mainly due to faster containment, according to the report. In the US, we actually saw breach costs continue to increase by over 9%, and driven by higher regulatory fines and increased detection and escalation costs. So that's one important point. Healthcare continues to be at the top of the list of the costliest industries to have a breach. Some good news, it is now only an average of $7.42 million. That's a decrease of 24% over last year. However, I want to point this out because this report gets quoted a lot, or the facts from this report get quoted a lot. You see it in the news and people use it in presentations. Keep in mind, this report's looking at 600 breaches across the entire globe. That is the sample size. Only 2% of them are in healthcare. So a sample size of about 12 healthcare organizations, and furthermore, 11% of the overall organizations they include here are from the US. So in reality, the sample size might be just a few healthcare companies in the US, but it does get quoted a lot. And I think directionally, it's good to look at over time. But one other important point I'll make here is that these breaches cap out at 113,600 records. So they do not look at larger breaches. And we just talked about 3 breaches or 2 breaches that were above that number, one right at it. And we know many healthcare breaches are much larger. So the costs are actually much greater than that 7.4 million. But again, that's the number that a lot of people point to. We want to point that out here in the report. Some other things I'll highlight here. We'll probably refer back to this in the later part of the presentation, but one key finding was that organizations are skipping over security and governance for AI in favor of, quote unquote, do it now AI adoption. Really, there's a rush to implement AI. And of the breaches that were included in this report, 13% of those involved a security incident on an AI model or an application. And 97% of those organizations admitted that they lacked proper AI access controls that led to the breach. So again, some food for thought here as we're thinking about implementing AI. We also know that hackers are using AI. The report stated that 16% of breaches involved attackers using AI in their attack, often through phishing or deep fake techniques. And then back to some good news, though. In the past 2 years, the report found that security teams and tools have improved in detecting breaches, which is really important because, of course, the faster we detect it, the more we can do to prevent it and limit the impact and the cost. So 50% of these breaches were found by the security teams, as opposed to 42% the year before and 33% in 23. Recovery times still very long. 76% of the organizations in this report said it took longer than 100 days to recover, and 26% said more than 150 days, only 2% within as little as 50 days. So some really good facts there. The link to the report on the bottom of the slide. And one more fact on the next slide, I'll point out, really good graphic here is, and this is not surprising, that phishing has replaced stolen credentials this year as the most common initial attack vector. And also we have seen a rise in third-party and supply chain attacks, right? And those are all things we've been talking about over the past year, and it's really showing up in the data here. And these are also the most expensive attacks to have, of course, outside of a malicious insider, which is not necessarily as frequent, but it's very, very costly. you go to the next slide, we'll just turn to attacks on healthcare, specifically ransomware attacks in U.S. healthcare organizations over the last 30 days. This information is including those incidents that we know about. So typically we find this information through ransomware gang leak sites, as well as publicly available information or threat intelligence that we're getting. About 22 attacks over the last 30 days. A few things I'll highlight here. Inc. Ransom, who for a long time was at the top of the leaderboard, they did not leak any healthcare organization data in the month of July. It's possible that they've shifted their focus to U.S. retail. We know that there have been some large attacks on retail organizations like Delhaize Ahold. That was in November, but not reported, I think, until June. And then recently, Dollar Tree had a large attack as well. At the top of the list this month, we have 3 threat actors we talked about in previous briefings. WorldLeaks, which came onto the scene in our analysis last month. That's a spinoff of Hunters International. SafePay, who we talked about, I think in May or April, not in the June report, but here they are again. They added 3 victims to their leak site in July. And then Keelan, who continues to be a very prolific threat actor targeting healthcare organizations after taking on Ransom Hub's affiliate network. They're constantly at the top of this chart. And as we usually see, there's always one new threat actor that makes its way up to somewhere in the top part of the left side of the chart. And this month, that's Kawa 4096, who's responsible for at least 2 ransomware attacks, including an attack on Susan B. Allen Memorial Hospital, where they allege that they have stolen 210 gigabytes of data. They caused some major IT outages there. We're going to talk about them on the next slide in a minute. I'll just highlight a few other ones here before we move on. We had AccuReference, which was attacked, at least claimed to be attacked by Keelan. That's an interesting one. They are not new to ransomware. That AccuReference had a pretty big attack from Medusa back in 2023 with a $1 million ransomware payment request. And then we saw Residia coming back onto the scene this month as well. And they had a major attack with Cookeville Regional Medical Center, which included bringing down their EHR system. That's a 269-bed hospital, and they were operating under downtime procedures for a period of time, had to cancel elective surgeries and other services. And Residia also claimed an attack on Florida Hand, which is a fairly small practice, but claiming a pretty large ransom at $640,000. We know that they also attacked Florida Lung, I think, several months ago as well. On the next slide, I mentioned, Kawa 4096. So this is a new ransomware group that first emerged in June 25. They've claimed, as of today, I saw at least 17 victims by that include two attacks on healthcare, as I said before, in the U.S. Very aggressive group. They are publicly claiming their attacks. They are posting proof of the breach on their leak site, which includes patient claims, employee forms, things like that, and really to try to pressure the victims to pay the ransom. Interesting, it mimics elements of other ransomware operations. So the ransom note text, for example, is nearly identical to Keelan's ransomware note, and their dark website, which uses that green on black terminal looking style, is very, very similar to Akira. So some think they're trying to gain some credibility here by using similar elements of other, pretty well-known and I guess, quote unquote, respected ransomware groups. What we're seeing with them as well as with other groups is they're becoming more sophisticated in how they execute these attacks. So for example, with Kawa 4096, they're using multi-threaded encryption to speed up the encryption process. They are also able to terminate specific services and processes to disable security software. So we talked in the past about EDR, beating EDR. They can unlock files that are locked for encryption. And they have a very aggressive anti-recovery behavior as well, where they delete shadow volume copies and restore points, just wipe everything out to make it very difficult for the victim to recover. And of course, like others, they're using double extortion techniques, as we see typically in healthcare. On the next slide, wanted to cover, again, a group that we've spoken about here, but there is a new CISA advisory, and there are some updates in that advisory. The I think in the June 20, it was probably just in June, I had discussed, we were seeing a lot of these attacks coming from Scattered Spider, which is not a ransomware group on its own, but it's really more of an intrusion and extortion crew. It's English speaking. They think, kids in their teens, up until, young adults in their 20s. And so it's kind of an interesting group. They're all over the world, and they tend to partner with ransomware gangs and use the ransomware gang software. So they're really a type of affiliate. Most recently working with the Dragon Force ransomware gang, active since 2022, but they've evolved and intensified their techniques in 23 through 25 and a lot recently. So one of the reasons we talk about them is because they have highly effective social engineering techniques. And these are things that we see throughout healthcare as a big source of breaches. They operate in campaigns. They typically hit several companies in one industry or sector in succession, then they move on to another sector. So in Q2 25, they were very focused on insurance. Then they moved on to retail. They had some big attacks in the UK. Then they moved on to the airlines. You've heard about a lot of those cyber attacks that were happening with airlines. We don't know that they're all related to Scattered Spider, but very likely some of them are, or maybe all of them are. And we've seen, people getting arrested. You may have seen that in the news from Scattered Spider, but they actually have hundreds, or believed to have hundreds of members throughout the world. So it makes it really hard to one, not just to catch them, but it makes them unpredictable and inconsistent, and they're very quick at changing their techniques to stay ahead of defenders. So on July 29th, CISA released this advisory that discusses new tactics, techniques, and procedures, and really just indicating, again, that they're continuing to become more and more sophisticated with their social engineering techniques, as well as using these new variants of ransomware. So some of the things that they noted that are consistent, I'd say, with what we've talked about. Most recently, they are posing as employees to convince IT or help desk staff to provide sensitive information, reset employees' passwords, transfer the employee's MFA to a device under their control. They're also using push bombing, which is where they're trying to exploit multi-factor authentication by bombarding the users with push notifications or OTP requests. And really what they're banking on is that they, for example, keep hitting that mobile authenticator with a request, and they're doing this, of course, for many victims. Eventually, somebody is just going to get really annoyed and hit approve, right? And it's a numbers game, and that's how they're beating MFA. They've been very good at evading detection on target networks using living off the land techniques, commonly install remote access software, and again, they're changing their techniques for the purposes of exercising stealth and persistence. One other thing they do, if they can get to a point where they can escalate their permissions or they compromise an account with domain admin rights, they're going to create new accounts so that if they get caught or shut down with the original account, they have a backdoor to get back in. And this one, which is just simply, unheard of, at least I think, is they've actually been observed using those accounts to join Microsoft Teams meetings of security teams that are actually discussing the incident. So they're actually they're finding ways to get into the communications, the emails of the security teams to learn what do they know about our attack and what are they doing about it. So very, very advanced group, and an adversary we need to be concerned about. FBI describes them as a serious and ongoing threat and says that even robust MFA and security systems can be undermined by Scattered Spiders. We need to take them very seriously. Next slide. I'm going to move quick here because we've still got a lot to cover. We've discussed Interlock as well in the past, February and May. You can refer back to those meetings. Again, we have a new CISA advisory. They've been observed by threat analysts targeting U.S. healthcare. This goes back to Texas Tech University Health Science Centers in September. We talked about them in the fall with community health centers and substance abuse treatment centers being targeted. And then in May of this year, Kettering Health had a very large, impactful ransomware attack. Again, the advisory is pretty consistent with what we've talked about, but there are some things here that are good to revisit. So this group is using a tactic and technique and procedure known as a drive-by attack, also called a drive-by download attack. And that's when a cyber attack occurs, when a malicious script is causing a program to download and install itself on a user's device, of course, without the user knowing it or providing permission. So, the way they're going about doing this, the FBI is described as a, quote, uncommon method among ransomware groups. So They're also, I'll talk a little bit about how they're doing that, but they're also using the click fix social engineering technique. That's another technique where they trick a user into executing a malicious payload under the guise of fixing an issue in the victim system. So the victim thinks that they're going to a site to download something as a patch or a security update even, but really what's happening is it's allowing them, the threat actor, to gain access to the victim system. So how are they doing that specifically, and what's new? Well, they're creating phishing websites that are really engineered to appear. They were doing this. They were creating phishing websites that were very well engineered to look like credible platforms like Google Chrome, MS Edge, MS Teams, like things that look very real. And of course, again, the user goes there to install that update and then downloads the payload. Now what they're actually doing, a couple of things. First of all, they're compromising existing sites so they are legitimate sites, but they're still managing to get that payload, a link to that payload on there. And they're also using CAPTCHAs to trick users, again, with the same end result. User clicks on the CAPTCHA, it follows the instructions of the CAPTCHA, reportedly to provide them with access, but really it opens up, gives them instructions to do something that will then, again, download that payload. So again, you can see these techniques continue to evolve. We start to recognize them, and then they move on to something else. So again, good things that we want to talk about later, including in our security awareness programs. You can move on to the next slide. As always, we want to just spend a minute on OCR enforcement. So we continue to see OCR enforcement related to ransomware attacks. This is now the 14th ransomware enforcement action that was, I didn't put the date on here, but this was very recently, I think maybe even a week ago, we saw OCR come out with yet another enforcement action. And again, as always, almost always, we see that there was risk analysis failure, and risk analysis continues to be a very strong initiative by OCR, specifically with this settlement, which led to a 2-year corrective action plan. Syracuse Ambulatory Service Center, which does business as a specialty surgery center of Central New York, reported a breach, unauthorized access, back in March 21. OCR investigated it, found out that it was actually a ransomware attack, and really through that investigation discovered that this surgical center never conducted an accurate and thorough risk analysis, and as such left itself vulnerable to a ransomware attack. They didn't do the risk analysis. They didn't identify those high risks, and of course were not able to then make the appropriate take the appropriate steps to bring that risk to an acceptable level. In this case, Syracuse Ambulatory Surgical Center or Service Center also did not notify HHS in the expected amount of time. So I wanted to pull out a couple of quotes here. I think these are very telling from the relatively new OCR director, Paula Stannard. First one here is: conducting a thorough HIPAA-compliant risk analysis and developing and implementing risk management measures to address identified risks and vulnerabilities is even more necessary as sophisticated cyber attacks increase. So OCR is doubling down on this and saying it's always been required, it's always been important, but now, and think about some of the things we were talking about on these briefings, these techniques continue to evolve. Because it's becoming more sophisticated, it's even more necessary. So I think we can expect, again, more enforcement, but also OCR sending a very clear message. You want to protect yourself, focus on risk analysis. The second one, of course, it's a bit of just, I think, re-emphasizing the first point, but covered entities and business associates make themselves soft targets for cyber attacks if they fail to implement HIPAA security rule requirements, of course, referring not only to risk analysis, but others, but primarily that as a high priority requirement. Next slide, I'll wrap up here before we go to the discussion with Erik with some recommendations. And clearly, again, this is not fully comprehensive, but just related to some of the things that we're talking about in these briefings. And today, talked about the drive-by download and the click fix attacks. So, we want to make sure we have DNS filtering implemented that would help to block access to malicious websites. And we also want to have web application firewalls in place to filter any type of harmful traffic. As I say in every meeting, we have to train the workforce members to identify the latest techniques, the specific techniques, and that training has to be frequently updated. It has to be very much tailored to what's happening in healthcare. So we always ask as a reminder, please, to go back and give this information out to your workforce. In the environment we're in, we have to assume that we're going to see certain individuals targeted. We have risky users, high value users, especially with scattered spider. We've seen them going after people that are going to have a high level of permission. We see that with business email compromise. So monitoring those risky accounts, certainly monitoring for risky logins for situations where sign-in attempts have been flagged as potentially compromised. We really need to be investigating that very, very quickly. We also know that social engineering continues to evolve. A lot of it is being combined now with AI. And while we want to have MFA implemented everywhere, it is not a silver bullet. MFA is getting beaten, and we need to assume that threat actors at some point are going to compromise those accounts. So we have to have good network segmentation, prevent the threat actors from moving laterally, prevent them from installing remote monitoring tools. And then, of course, we want to up the game when it comes to password resets, MFA. In particular, many organizations are requiring secondary validation that account, that user is actually who they say they are, or even in-person validation. And when it comes to security incidents, I mentioned scattered spider actually lurking in Teams meetings and reading the emails. Well, that means we probably shouldn't be communicating on our normal channels during a security incident. So we might want to revisit our incident response procedures and see how are we communicating and when do we need to make sure we're moving to external communication channels. Again, we're seeing a lot of threat actors that are getting much better at deleting backups. They're making it very hard to recover. So we have to have secure offline immutable backups for critical data. And then finally, that risk analysis, if there's any way to know where you have, where you're a soft target, to use the OCR director's term, the way to do that is through a risk analysis, to actually evaluate the controls, evaluate the vulnerabilities of threats. Are they sufficient? And make sure that we have the appropriate mitigating plan in place to bring that risk to an acceptable level. So that ends the briefing portion. Very excited to speak today with Erik Pupo. As Monica said in the opening, we have a massive transformation going on right now in digital health, and really a lot of great things happening, of course, with artificial intelligence and interoperability. And Erik's organization, Guidehouse, one of Clearwater's valued partners, by the way, who we love working with. They've done a lot of really good things in the space and have some good research that Erik's going to pull on today for our discussion. And of course, we want to talk a bit about how this technology transformation is dovetailing into some of the critical cybersecurity implications to protect organizations. So before we get into that, Erik, I want to just ask if you could tell us a little bit more about Guidehouse and a little bit more about your role there.
Awesome. Thank you, Steve. So Erik Pupo, I'm the director for commercial health IT at Guidehouse. So what is Guidehouse? We are a very, very large, second largest healthcare management consulting firm in the US. And what that means is we get exposed to and literally can see across the entire healthcare system, payers, providers, from the largest hospitals to small rural critical access hospitals, small providers. We get a unique view in the types of services that we can offer to see into where tech, where cybersecurity specifically has an impact. And our firm does advisory work, revenue cycle, clinical operational improvements. We do a lot of work in technology, which is my area of cloud, AI, cybersecurity, a lot of work with data modernization, and then managed services as well, where we see a lot of that third-party vendors, third-party activities that occur to